such short notice. Today's hearing covers two items. First, we'll be taking up the SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act. For certain districts around the country, this marriage penalty negatively impacts a great many families and is therefore a top priority for our colleagues representing them. I look forward to the discussion from our witnesses on this issue, including from my good friend, Mr. Lawler, who represents one of the districts most affected by this policy. We will also take up House Resolution 987, a resolution denouncing the harmful anti-American energy policies of the Biden administration. Last week, President Biden announced that his administration would halt permitting for new liquefied natural gas, or LNG, export facilities. This is just the latest in a long line of policy actions taken by President Biden that will set back American energy independence, damage the economy, and hurt the American people. Natural gas is a critical part of the American economy. It's especially true in my home state of Oklahoma, which is the fifth largest natural gas producing state in the country, with nearly 350,000 jobs in the state tied to the natural gas production. For my constituents, supporting natural gas production is not an academic exercise. It's how hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans feed, clothe, and shelter themselves and their families. The same is true for countless Americans nationwide who make their living in the energy sector. I look forward to joining my colleagues in denouncing President Biden's harmful energy policies. I'll now yield to my very good friend, our ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was mentioning to you, that we're told that the President is up here for the prayer breakfast. I think what we need is not prayer, but an exorcism around here. I want to begin by asking a question. What the hell is wrong with this place? We're meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the Republican leadership is making this committee irrelevant. We haven't passed a rule for a bill that has become law in 8 months. 8 months. 8 months of pointless meetings where Republicans have churned out nothing of substance. You pass bills to try to get them to you pass bills to try to get them to the president's desk, not because your own members are holding you hostage. I mean, this is absurd. And I thought to myself when I heard we would be using emergency procedures, I said, maybe we will meet on an actual emergency. Maybe we'll meet on a bill about climate change, or maybe we'll pass legislation to help Ukraine, or address the conflict in Israel, or the epidemic of gun violence, or opiate deaths, or rising child hunger, or the decline of democracy around the globe. And I come here to find out it's this. This is what we meet on. This is the big emergency. Fixing something you guys broke in your tax scam 5 years ago. This isn't an emergency. This is offensive. We don't have emergency meetings to tee up legislation for the following week when we have actual emergencies. We have had floods and hurricanes and blizzards hit this country, and this committee doesn't hold an emergency meeting. The emergency we are meeting on today is Mike Lawler and his New York Republicans' election, because the House just overwhelmingly passed a tax bill that did not include a SALT fix. So now we have to rush to pretend that they're solving the SALT problem. I will say this meeting gives us a chance to remind everyone how terrible the GOP's tax scam really is. It gave 83% of benefits to the top 1% of Americans. So yeah, we need to look into rewriting or overturning not just this part, but the entire damn bill. But that's not an emergency. Not when we've been telling you since Trump passed it that your tax laws sucked. It was a giveaway for billionaire corporations then, and it's a giveaway for billionaire corporations now. It was all for ultra-rich CEOs and Fortune 500 companies. It screwed over the American people, hardworking Americans. And now, all of a sudden, the other side appears to have woken up to the fact that it was a disaster. This SALT thing is also the worst possible version of a fix, too. It would only apply to a single year that is already past, 2023. I mean, it's not even a good solution. I get it. It's tax season, and your constituents suddenly realize you screwed them over, and they're mad at you. Deal with it. That's not called an emergency. That's called the consequences of your own actions. And then, apparently, we're also looking at a resolution to denounce the energy plan of the Biden administration. Is that truly an emergency, too? A resolution that doesn't do anything? I mean, there aren't even words to describe how dumb and out of step this is. So, you know, what an absolute clown show this place has become under Republican rule. No vision, no plans, no platform, total chaos. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. And now we're following freshman Republicans over a cliff as they head towards November. What a shame, and I yield back.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Representative Mike Lawler and Representative Bradley Schneider from the Committee on Ways and Means. Representative Lawler, I welcome you, your testimony. I think it's your first appearance at the Rules Committee, so we're delighted to have you and look forward to what you have to say.
Mr. Chairman, just may I have,
Certainly.
Yeah. So, Mr. Lawler is not on the Ways and Means Committee. Is there a Republican Ways and Means member going to testify? I mean, that's usually the way this works. Is the Committee of Jurisdiction, as a Democrat and Republican, is there going to be a Republican Ways and Means?
He's testifying on behalf of the Ways and Means Committee.
But he's not on the Ways and Means Committee.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that tells you a lot, too. Okay, I yield back.
I'd be happy to do that, but not solely in my discretion. Mr. Lawler, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here today to consider a piece of legislation that is long overdue, the SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act. This bill would eliminate an unfair tax loophole in our current tax code, which penalizes married couples and prevents them from deducting the full $20,000 they deserve, instead of arbitrarily holding them to $10,000, despite the fact that two individuals are filing taxes together. This unfair penalty has had an immense impact on families across the country who have been double taxed for living in higher cost states. This legislation before us today, which I introduced as my first bill in the House, remedies the penalty and will provide millions in relief for families in New York's 17th District and billions in tax relief for families across the country. Some background information that may be helpful for further framing this issue for the committee. Fewer taxpayers deducted their state and local taxes in the 2020 tax year. Nationwide, 9% of taxpayers used the SALT deduction in 2020 as compared to 31% in 2017. This is a decrease of nearly 31.1 million taxpayers who didn't deduct their state and local taxes in 2020 as compared to 2017. While SALT deductions are limited to $10,000, the average amount of deduction decreased to $8,135 in 2020 from $13,400 in 2017. Additionally, and it's important to note, there was no cost of living adjustment built into the SALT cap. In New York State, 35%, or 3,418,300 returns of filers, took the SALT deduction in 2017. In 2020, just 10%, or 1,020,790 returns of filers took the SALT deductions. Some more pertinent information at the district level. In 2017 in New York 17, 47.7% of filers itemized their taxes. After the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this fell to 22.7% in 2018, to 21.7% in 2019, and to just 18.7% in 2020. As you can see, the SALT cap has had a significant impact on those filing their taxes and what they did or didn't receive in deductions. Beyond that, in my district specifically, residents are dealing with immense housing costs amidst near record high mortgage interest rates. In Rockland and Westchester counties, the top two highest property tax counties in America, according to the National Association of Realtors, the monthly cost of a mortgage was $1,000 more in 2023 than it was in 2022, and in Putnam and Dutchess counties, it was at least $800 more per month. In both instances, these are additional housing costs of almost $10,000 or more a year, and that is totally unsustainable. In addition, inflation is still severely impacting families in my district, and prices are up double digits since January of 2021 when President Biden took office. People having to pay thousands of dollars more a year in grocery costs and tens of thousands of dollars more a year in housing costs are making things unbearable across the country. But these issues aren't exclusive to my district. The increase in housing costs and increase in inflation is being felt nationwide. The single most important thing we can do right now to help the families bear this brunt is provide real, tangible tax relief, which this bill does. The one-year cost of this bill is approximately $8 billion, and the 10-year cost is just over $7 billion. This is a very minor expense while providing room for significant economic growth to communities like mine in the Hudson Valley and tax relief to families across the country. This is a pro-family measure which rights a wrong. This is ultimately about fairness. I'd like to thank my colleagues who joined me in this venture, specifically Congressman Lawler, Garbarino, D'Esposito, Molinaro, Garcia, and Harris, among many others, for their work with me in getting this bill in front of the committee today. I'd also like to thank Speaker Johnson for recognizing the importance of this legislation and for his help in addressing this issue. And lastly, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the committee, particularly Chairman Cole and his staff, for convening at this early hour to consider the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Snyder, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here this morning. I do have the same question that Mr. McGovern asked in the beginning, is why are we here? But I have another question as I look at what we're talking about this morning in this bill. I'm going to channel Peggy Lee and Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. What is that all there is? I agree with my colleague, Mr. Lawler, that the penalty of the cap on the SALT deduction isn't fair. That the working families who are bearing this burden in states like New York and Illinois need real relief. But they need real relief, something that's going to make a difference. The SALT cap is a penalty on working families. It is double taxation by the very principle. I've constantly been surprised, and we've talked about this in the Ways and Means Committee many times, is why my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to penalize people, penalize communities. The communities where we live, in Illinois and New York, have made the decision to responsibly fund their local governments, to pay for parks, for schools, to pay for quality roads. They've made the decision to do so and to put the burden on the people who live and benefit from those. These are states that have high property taxes, may have high income taxes. And then, because of the TCJA, decision was made to tax those again, double taxation. It's not fair. We need, and I've been calling for, a full repeal. And I think if Mr. Lawler was serious, he'd be here in front of you asking for a full repeal of the SALT tax. But that's not where we are. What we're talking about is a small step for a 1 year looking backwards. And what we're talking about is doing this in a bill that was introduced last night with no time to read. We're sitting here 8 in the morning, having had no chance to consider it. There's no debate taking place on this, and we're just trying to rush it through. As Mr. McGovern said, rush it through to help the sponsors of this bill in their re-election campaigns. This bill is going to create extensive work for the IRS because we're looking backwards. It makes changes to tax year 2023, and if we look at our calendar, today is the first day of the second month of 2024. We have a bill we just voted out of the House that does give relief to people, that went through the Ways and Means Committee, that had a chance for a markup and a debate on the floor. And yet here we are talking about something that comes in the middle of the night. This makes no sense. And if you talk about the middle of the night, I'm going to quote Leader Scalise, comments he made as we were talking about the beginning of the rules package of this very same Congress. He quotes, I quote him rather, "Bills appear by dark of night, bills that nobody have read. They're 1,000 pages long, where members aren't even allowed to give input in committee or on the floor to address problems they know their constituents will face if these bills pass. Yet, the bills are passed because they are written in rooms behind closed doors by a small number of people not concerned about the consequences that will affect so many millions of people across this nation." We sit here today talking a bill written in the dark of night by a few people in a closed room that does very little to address a real serious problem. Double taxation is wrong. It's wrong in principle. It puts working families over a barrel. It makes it hard for people to get ahead. It's something that should have never been put in the first place, should be completely repealed. But to do a 1 year little thing does nothing, and to do it in this way is wrong. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair has no questions, so I'll yield to my very good friend, distinguished Vice Chairman. No questions. The ranking member.
Well, thank you. Mr. Lawler, was Was there a hearing on this bill in the Ways and Means Committee, or a markup, or?
As far as I know, no.
I know.
Well, you're on the Ways and Means Committee. Was there, was there?
no
Okay,
hearing.
all right. Do we have a CBO score?
As far as I know, no.
Okay, and when is this coming to the floor? Does anybody know? Is this coming up today? We're not doing this today,
No,
right?
it's not coming up today.
So, Monday, are we doing this, or does anyone know?
That'll be up to the majority leader.
Okay, since the chairman or no other Republican on the Ways and Means Committee is here, does the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Republican chairman, does he support this? Do we know? I don't know, that's not a trick question. I'm just trying to figure out, like,
If I can, Mr. McGovern, this is.
no, because we all talk about regular order, and committees do
haven't
hearings and
gone about
markups, and, and I don't agree with the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee on very much. I'm just wondering whether, do we know whether, let me ask you another question. Do we know whether the Freedom Caucus will vote for the rule to allow for consideration of this? Do we have an assurance that, because, I saw you switch your vote on Tuesday, Mr. Lawler. You were about to take down the 6th rule of the year, and reports said that you switched your vote because you got a meeting with wait for it, the guy you were already meeting with. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but I'm just trying to figure, you folded for this? I mean, I'm trying to figure, what are we getting here? What is happening? We don't know whether the Republicans on Ways and Means support this. We don't know if the chairman supports this. We know it's not coming up today, but we don't know when it's coming up. Do we know whether did you get an assurance that Republicans on your side would support the rule?
We are continuing to work to get this bill to the floor and passed on the floor. The first step is to come through this committee, which is why we are here today. I find it entertaining to listen to lectures about repealing the SALT cap when Democrats had full control of Congress and the White House. They did no such thing.
Let me give you a little information about what the first step should be.
Yep.
Right? The first step should be, the bill is referred to the Ways and Means Committee. The first step should be a hearing in the Ways and Means Committee, and then there should be a markup. We're not the first step. So I just want to set the record straight. And so this is not, to say this is the first step basically kind of undermines, the committee system here. Mr. Schneider, when is the first time you saw this bill that we're dealing with here in the Rules Committee?
Last evening after we voted on the tax bill that went through the Ways and Means Committee for markup.
And just for the record, is this bill paid for, and how is it offset? Is this bill paid for, and how is it offset?
The bill is not paid for.
So there's no offset, okay? When Democrats voted to raise the SALT cap in 2019, it was offset, just for the record. We did. And this was expected for tax year 2023. And I know that Ways and Means Democrats worked tirelessly with the IRS to ensure the child tax credit expansion could be implemented as soon as possible. Mr. Lawler or Mr. Schneider, do we have any assurances from the IRS that they could administer these changes for the filing season? Have there been formal discussions with the IRS on that?
Well, as with the bill that was just passed, we are amending tax year 2023, so there would be no indication or reason why they wouldn't be able to adjust this. I would also note that my colleague, Mr. D'Esposito, previously presented my original version of this bill to the Ways and Means Committee in a hearing. So there has been discussion about this bill. This bill was introduced in January of 2023. It was reintroduced last night with a minor change, but the objective is to provide tax relief. And I would think, especially coming from your state, Mr. McGovern, or Mr. Schneider's state, that you would want to provide tax relief to hardworking middle-class families. That's what this bill is about. And whether it only applies to 2023 or years forward, the objective is to provide tax relief. The Biden economy has caused
I
chaos
appreciate that,
for
but
hardworking families
but
across
I guess
this
that my,
country.
and I'm going to yield to Mr. Schneider, but I do know that there were lots of conversations with the IRS and members of the Ways and Means Committee to make sure that what just passed yesterday, if it were to become law, they could implement, right? And, you know, again, I think those are pretty important conversations, given the fact that we are now doing that. And so the answer to whether there was any conversation with the IRS is no. Mr. Schneider?
No, I think that's a good point, and just to clarify something, you know, every committee has what we call Members Day. And it's when members not on the committee can come and present their priorities. It's not a hearing, it's a chance for members to share their priorities. This bill hasn't been presented in committee, it hasn't been discussed in the committee. What we passed last night, which had a child tax credit, real relief to working families, the Committee on Ways and Means, the Committee on Ways and Means worked very closely with the IRS to make sure that what we were talking about, what we were proposing, could actually be implemented in a timely and efficient way by the IRS. In fact, the only information the IRS needs to administer the child tax credit changes are the number of children and the individual or family's income. Those are items that the taxpayers are already required to put on their tax returns. There's nothing new in that information. What we're talking about today is something completely different. As Mr. Lawler noted, a substantial number of taxpayers who are affected by this are claiming the standard deduction when they file their 2023 tax return. That's what Mr. Lawler presented in his first opening remarks. And because of the current law with the $10,000 SALT cap, many of these families don't have enough other itemized deductions to make sense of that. For example, someone who is perhaps a little bit older, has paid off their mortgage, they're not going to have an interest deduction. Maybe they don't have enough income that they're paying a lot to charity. The standard deduction for last year was $27,700. They would need at least another $17,700 in deductions to make any sense for this. So this is all new information that is not included on that. It doesn't include on the tax return the state and local tax payments the individual makes. So the IRS doesn't have an easy way to address that. We're in a situation that's going to create a heavy workload for the IRS that's already burdened, delaying return processing and potentially the refunds that many people count on. They need this information. There is a process that should go through in this House. We talk about regular order all the time. My colleagues on both sides talk about regular order. A bill is introduced, it goes to the Committee of Jurisdiction, the committee has a hearing, does a markup, and then it comes to this committee. It is not a starting point to start at this committee, it is the ending point, the last point before it goes to the floor. So unlike what we saw last night, where we worked it, we went through the process, we coordinated with the IRS to make sure it was feasible, what we're talking about today is something in the dark of the night, something that hasn't gone through the process, and something that's going to create complications and make it much more difficult for taxpayers and the government.
I would just note that Member Day counts as a hearing under the rules, and it is a tax cut, so it does not need a pay-for under the rules.
No, it may not need a pay for, but, you know, I guess we were in the habit of paying for things because we actually care. When we say we care about the deficit and the debt, we actually mean it. But in any event,
You've increased spending by $5 trillion in 2 years. You're not in the habit of paying for anything.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So since you're the only one here on the Ways and Means Committee, does the Ways and Means Committee make it a habit to skip markups of bills that are about to become law?
I don't want to speak for all of my colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee, but I suspect, like me, most of them take offense to tax bills and other bills of our jurisdiction not coming through our committee.
I find it absurd that we're saying that Member Day counts as a hearing on legislation like this, that, and again, there's no markup, that's the other part of this, but if that's the new standard here, then we, you know, boy, that changes everything. how we do it. Can anybody here answer me? And I'll just end with this. I mean, because I'm just trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Is this just an exercise in pretend to be able to give some members some video to put in a campaign ad to say that they're fighting for their constituents? I mean, which, by the way, you can't do. You're not supposed to do that. So just so you know, you can't take video from hearings and put it in a campaign ad. But like, what are the assurances that this is real? That we're actually going to do this? That's going to pass? That the Senate will take it up? And you couldn't even assure me that you got the votes here in the House, and you can't even tell me whether the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee supports this. So what are the assurances that this will become law? We can't even get a date when this is going to come up. So can anybody tell me that we get assurances that this is all
with all due respect, for my constituency and for constituencies across this country, this is a very real issue.
I'm not saying
inflation has crippled our economy. It has cost millions and billions of dollars for hardworking constituents all over this country. And so to belittle or demean the effort to provide real tax relief to constituents across this country, where were you? Why weren't you standing up for your constituents, fighting for this to be included in the tax bill?
Well, I'm not
Mr. Schneider's on the Ways and Means Committee.
Where were you? Where were you?
Why would you support a bill coming out of committee
Where were you, Mr. Lawler?
that doesn't include SALT? Where was Senator Wyden? Why didn't Senator Wyden fight for this in his negotiations?
Excuse me, I control the time.
The first bill that I introduced
you can
was to
filibuster
provide
when the
this
Republicans
relief.
yield to you. But where the hell were you?
I've been fighting for this relief.
Here we are at the last minute. I mean, your party is in control. And by the way, this problem...
This was a negotiation between Senator Wyden and Chairman Smith.
Right,
if I may.
Who is...
I would just ask both, let me interrupt quickly. Just ask both of you not to speak over one another. It's very difficult on our stenographer. So with that, yield back to...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Last time I checked, Chairman Smith was a Republican and part of your party.
And Senator Wyden is a Democrat.
And number one. Number two, I want to point out for the record, the reason why we have this problem is because of the Trump tax cut that you guys all supported. You weren't here, I don't think, when we passed it, but the bottom line is Republicans supported. That's why this needs to be fixed.
Which Senator Schumer could have filibustered in the Senate, but did not.
This needs to be fixed. Mr. Schneider.
Thank you. Let me touch on two things. First, I'll start with the TCJA when it passed, and we talked about it. And at that time, we raised grave concerns about the impact of the cap on state and local taxes. It affects the people I represent, the people Mr. Lawler represents. It affects them in a very adverse way. Illinois is one of the states affected by it. We tried to fix it then. Voters were upset. We can talk about politics, but two of the Republicans that were in Congress at that time lost their races in the subsequent election. I was there. I watched the debates. Much of it was about the impact this cap was going to have on working families in Illinois. And I think that's instructive on why we're seeing this today, because lessons can be learned. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I believe, understand the impact the SALT cap is having on the people they represent. As far as why wasn't it in the bill that came to the floor last night, I can answer that. And this is where markups matter. We had a markup in Ways and Means. We introduced an amendment to add real relief from the SALT deduction cap in that bill. Democrats voted for that. My Republicans colleagues, who are in the majority, voted against it. It did not make it into the bill. Why? Because the Republicans voted it down. It was real relief. It wasn't just a one-year, let's do a little bit tiny thing here. There was real relief there that would make a difference for families, not just 1 year, but going forward, something they can plan for. That's what we need to be doing. So there is a process that should be in place. It's defined in the rules passed by the Congress, passed by the majority in January of last year, that were ignored in this case, and we're coming to the Rules Committee for a piece of legislation that does very little, introduced in the dark of the night, with uncertainty whether it will even come to the floor or pass.
Right. And again, to be clear, I mean, the Trump tax cut that created this current mess. So we can try to blame Joe Biden all they want, but this was a deliberate issue in the Trump tax
Mr.
cut.
Schneider, just
Am
out
I
of
right?
curiosity, how did you pay for your amendment in
Excuse
the
me,
Ways
that's
and
not the way,
Means?
we don't, I mean, I know that you could be on every committee, but you're not on the Rules Committee. Right now, you're pretending you're on the Ways and Means Committee, but that's not the way we operate here. I'm sorry, Mr. Schneider.
No, I was done with my comments.
Yeah, I know. And again, I would just say, and I'm happy to yield. I mean, my friend, Mr. Massey, is a stickler for regular order. I'm happy. I don't know whether he believes that what's happening right now is regular order. This is the way we should operate. An emergency meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday on a bill that we don't even know whether the Republican majority supports. We can't get we have no date when it may come up. Is this, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman if he would like. Is this regular order in your opinion?
If you yield me time, I would just yield it to Mr. Lawler, because I've never seen one of us cut people off when they're trying to answer our question.
Well, he wasn't trying to answer a question. He was asking a question of Mr. Schneider. And the way I think it works here is that you can ask Mr. Lawler a question or Mr. Schneider a question, but witnesses don't ask each other questions in the same. But if you,
I'll wait my turn then.
I'm just asking. But does anyone here? Could anyone here, maybe a show of hands, think this is regular order that we're following right now? Okay. I mean, look, I'll just close, Mr. Chairman, by saying the idea that we are here at having an emergency meeting on this when there is no assurance that this is even going to come to the floor is absurd. This is not an emergency. If you want to say it is an emergency or provide political cover for one or more of your members, fine. But, I mean, this is pretend. This is not real. And I think we have to fix this. But this is not what's happening here. And we've seen a lot up here under the Republican majority. I've never quite witnessed something like this. But in any event, I yield back.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions he may have.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank God for double standards, because if it weren't for double standards, Democrats would have no standards at all. Let me just go through irregular order from the 117th. And this is just a brief list. I could have a more exhaustive list, but the majority in the 117th noticed 49 emergency measures. It's nearly 40% more than the 34 emergency members under the Republican majority in the 115th. Let me just give you some examples. The Democratic majority noticed 4 policing bills in late July, but failed to bring them to the floor. Why did they fail to bring them to the floor? Easy, because of pressure from far-left radicals in the Progressive Caucus. But despite that, they were looking at an election cycle where they needed to bring these bills to the floor. So nearly 2 months later, again, after the midterm elections and facing political pressure, the House Democrats noticed those same bills under what? An emergency designation. Okay, another example of kowtowing to the radical extremists on the far left. The Democrats on 117th, the Rules Committee called an emergency meeting on the Protecting Renters from Eviction Act of 2021. That was after the House waited in limbo for nearly 9 hours. The majority failed to even report the so-called emergency from the Rules Committee. On 4 separate other occasions, the Democratic majority announced meetings on bills before text was even available. We didn't even have text, if you remember that, and we were here expecting to debate in the Rules Committee. I could go on. There was also irregularities with the massive bill, which was Build Back Better. But again, the hypocrisy and the double standards are totally, they're just amazing when you look at the totality of the irregular order we were under during Democrat control. It was asked of my friend, Mr. Lawler, where he was on all this. I can tell you where Mr. Lawler was. We have been in negotiations since Mr. Lawler got here. We've been having talks with him, Mr. Desposito, Mr. Laloda, others, numerous times, not just this week. But Mr. Lawler, would you like to respond to any of this and talk about the process here?
Thank you, Mr. Reschenthaler. The very first bill that I introduced was a version of this bill. And the reason I introduced eliminating the marriage penalty was because I understand that at the end of the day, we have to find compromise. Yes, I would like to have unlimited salt back. Yes, I would like to lift the cap on salt. It expires in 2025. So if we do nothing at all, it expires. But our constituents need immediate tax relief because of the failed economic policies of Joe Biden. Inflation has crippled our economy. The cost of living has skyrocketed. The cost of energy has skyrocketed. The ranking member may dismiss the resolution that is coming after this, but the reality is that when you restrict natural gas, when you restrict oil, it actually has a negative impact on our economy, on cost of goods, on cost of transportation. This is an existential crisis for families all across the country, but especially in districts like mine. The ranking member comes from Massachusetts. The witness comes from Illinois. These are high-tax states. We all know that. And yes, I do believe that folks should not be penalized for living in high-tax states, which is why I have opposed the cap on salt. And I oppose double taxation. But when you are trying to compromise in a divided government, you have to actually be willing to negotiate. And this is what has been negotiated between myself, Mr. Lawler, Mr. D'Esposito, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Harris, Mr. Garbarino, with our colleagues on Ways and Means, as well as with leadership. I would have preferred this be in the bill. But unfortunately, Mr. Wyden, leading the Democrats who claim they want to lift the cap on salt, didn't fight to get it in the bill. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader from New York, silent. He didn't fight to get it in the bill. When Democrats had complete control of Washington for 2 years, and they increased spending by $5 trillion in 2 years, they didn't lift the cap on salt. They easily could have done that. And in fact, one of your colleagues came to me on the floor yesterday and said, "Thank you for fighting for this. When our party had complete control, we failed to do anything on this. Thank you for standing up for us." So to belittle the attempt to provide tax relief and say, oh, it's not enough. You're on the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Schneider, and yet did nothing to actually get it done. You could say you offered an amendment. Did you do anything to pay for it? What was the pay for? You're sitting here accusing us of not having a pay for on a tax cut, which doesn't require a pay for, but what was your pay for in the markup? I think what is absurd here is all of us are trying to help our constituents. Democrats fought to expand the child tax credit. I absolutely support that. That's why I sent a letter with Congressman Gottheimer to Chairman Smith a few weeks ago, calling for that. I believe in that. I believe in what was done to support our small businesses who are all struggling under this economy. But providing some salt relief is better than nothing. And if this is the agreement that we can get passed, why wouldn't we support that?
You asking me?
Sure. I'll yield time to you.
I'll tell you since the,
If it's,
All due respect, the gentleman from Pennsylvania yields the time.
thank you, Mr. Reschenthaler. Since 2017, I've been fighting this. I've worked with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We formed a bipartisan salt caucus to try to repeal it completely. We've talked about raising the cap to $100,000, to $80,000, to $60,000. We've talked about addressing the marriage penalty. I'm not saying what you're talking about is the wrong thing. What I'm saying is a 1-year retroactive change? Why aren't you fighting for 3 years until it expires? This seems like the least possible raising of a little finger to fight for your constituents. I come from a different place. I'm going to do everything I can, to do all I can to fight against what I consider an unfair tax, a double tax on working families. And that's what this is. It should be repealed completely. But certainly, working families deserve more than a 1-year de minimis sop that is a compromise made on the floor in the middle of the night.
again, at the end of the day, if this is what we can advance forward, that is better than nothing. And I would hope that all of my Democratic colleagues, especially from high-tax states, would support the effort. This is a two-page bill, by the way, that was introduced 13 months ago with one minor edit. So this is not some 1,000-page bill. This is not something that is hard to discern. It is something you have said you have been fighting for, so certainly you understand the issue. And I would just hope that you would support the effort here, because any level of tax relief on salt is better than zero tax relief on salt.
I agree, anything is better than nothing, but I'll go back to where I started. Is that all there is here?
I just want to, I'm sorry, Mr. Stein, I didn't mean to
just
cut
1
you
year.
off.
No.
Yeah, it's amazing, this newfound fight for salt from the left. You know, in the last Congress, there were numerous opportunities to do this. Again, as you said, Mr. Lawler, the Democrats controlled, of course, the White House, the Senate, and the House. There were also numerous opportunities to get salt done. It could have put it in Build Back Better, could have put it back in the IRA, could have put in a standalone, numerous opportunities. But now all of a sudden that you're pushing salt, now there's fight. It's quite amazing. I just want to end by thanking you for all your work on this. I know you put in hours on this, you and your colleagues, and well done in your first time on the Rules Committee. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, and welcome to our witnesses to this special emergency session of the House Rules Committee. Most Americans are probably wondering what emergency we are here to address. They might think we're here to pass policies that promote safer communities, better health care, good-paying jobs, or that we're here to pass overdue budget bills or support our national security and our allies abroad. They would be wrong. We're meeting in emergency session to consider two bills. The first is designed to provide a tax break to wealthy New Yorkers, and the second is designed to bash Biden administration policy. It is fair to ask why these bills were brought up under emergency proceedings, and the answer isn't pretty. It's an election year, and as our Rules colleague, Mr. Roy, so eloquently pointed out a few weeks ago, under Republican leadership, this Congress has done nothing of substance. And our Republican colleagues need something to go home and campaign on. So that's what we're going to do here today. Declare an emergency, do nothing, and then go home and campaign on it. We're meeting on an emergency basis for two bills that were only introduced less than 24 hours ago. They're going absolutely nowhere. The ink isn't even dry. With respect to the SALT bill, it's been noted that the bill was introduced last night with perhaps minor additions, but we really don't know what's in the bill, what the impacts are, as Mr. Schneider has suggested, because it hasn't been through committee process, it hasn't been through a hearing, a markup, there hasn't been the opportunity to amend it. There's no CBO estimate, but past CBO scores have indicated that poorly designed SALT bills would add billions to the deficit, as has been conceded. There's no pay for. And this one seems to be likely to create an administrative nightmare for the IRS because it includes a lot of, it would require a lot of data that's not commonly collected. So I would not call SALT deductions an emergency or a partisan resolution. I do have a lot of concerns about this bill. As has been noted, it hasn't been negotiated. It hasn't looked at what the impact is going to be. Just in the very short time we've had it, I noted 3 features of it which do cause concern. First, it's only available to people who itemize their taxes. So by definition, this is going to be people who make over $100,000. That's not going to be useful to the vast majority of my constituents. The second point is, as has been noted, it only applies to taxes filed this year, or for 2023. So it will give a benefit in 2024, which of course is an election year, so I think we all understand the reason for that part of the bill. And the third feature is that it only benefits married couples. Now, I know it's been framed as removing a marriage penalty, but census data shows that the demographics with respect to marriage have changed a lot in this country. and in particular, that fewer black people than white people are married. So I would have some questions about the disparate racial impact of this bill. The bills presented this morning are consistent with the course of conduct we've seen from the Republican majority this term. They claim a crisis, they do nothing or give a tax break to the rich, and then they leave town for a long weekend. So I can't support this bill, and I would yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for any questions he may have.
I thank the chairman and thank both of the witnesses for their testimony. I would echo the remarks of my colleagues, of the ranking member and of the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania. This hearing is nonsensical. The notion that we would consider this bill on an emergency basis, a bill that was introduced last night, a bill that has had no legislative hearing, no witnesses, no markup, no CBO score. That's your emergency? To say nothing of the disregard for regular order for the last year and a half, certainly since I've been on this Rules Committee, I've heard from many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about the need for regular order, making that their so-called imperative, only to see week after week them jettison the same principles that they claim to adhere to. There's an article in Punchbowl yesterday, I'm going to quote from it, because I think it's a great summation of why we're here. Quote, "In what might be the most predictable turn of events of this Congress, the moderate New York Republicans who were upset about the tax bill, the bill we considered last night, not including changes to SALT deductions, have backed down in exchange for almost nothing. The House Republican leadership has told the New Yorkers, principally Reps Nick Lolota, Mike Lawler, Anthony D'Esposito, and Andrew Garbarino, that they'll work on a bill allowing more deductions for state and local taxes for married couples, possibly for a vote next week. But it's not clear what that bill would even look like according to aides in and outside of the leadership. Of course, we now know in the late introduction last night what that bill looks like. There's a saying, this is from the article, in House Republican leadership circles, moderates always fold. In this case, that is true. But the moderates here really didn't have many cards to play. I disagree with only one sentence in that quote, and that's the last sentence, because of course they did have a card to play. They could have voted against the bill last night if they felt so passionate about this particular proposal, but they didn't. So I recognize that some folks think that this will prove to their electoral benefit, that it'll inure to their electoral benefit. I'm here to tell you it's simply not the case. The American people can see this for the farce that it is. And to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, in particular those whom I have respect for and have engaged in many a colloquy over the course of this last year in terms of regular order, I would just hope that perhaps you would adhere to the principles that you claim to support. At the risk of quoting Punchbowl twice, a reporter, as Tom knows, reporter Jake Sherman just tweeted this out. I thought it was an astute point. This rules vote, apparently he may be the only person watching this hearing. Some wealthy folks in New York, I guess, but this rules vote on SALT is a true test of whether Rep. Ralph Norman, Rep. Thomas Massey, and Chip Roy Texas, or their Twitter X handles, are true adherents to regular order. This SALT bill was introduced last night, hasn't gone through committee, no CBO score, et cetera, et cetera. I think he's right. It's a great test, an astute and salient point. Because I just cannot imagine, putting aside the merits, the impact that this bill has, in terms of the hardworking people of South Carolina or Kentucky. I'm not convinced that this SALT proposal is a huge priority for your respective constituencies. Perhaps you'll inform me otherwise. But putting aside the merits of the proposal, certainly with respect to regular order and the need for it, this doesn't fit the bill. And I'm not going to yield to my colleague, Mr. Massey, because I think he's next in the order here. So I eagerly await his rationale. But this isn't the way to do business. It's no way to run a train station, no way to run a government, no way to administer the Rules Committee or a majority. But if your goal is to administer the most chaotic, dysfunctional, and unproductive Congress in the modern history of the country, then this is probably the way to do it. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have.
Well, the one unfortunate fallout of the digital age is we can't line our bird cages anymore with those hill rags because we're reading them online. And I don't know how, you make decisions in Colorado and elsewhere, but in Kentucky, my constituents would be very disappointed if I sit here on Twitter and look at some reporter who makes his money by making the most outrageous headlines and tweets and then deciding to vote based on that. Or also back in Kentucky, nobody knows what Punch Bowl is. I represent 750,000 people, and if I sat here and quoted a Punch Bowl, they would think it sounded ridiculous. So whatever was quoted there plays no part into my decision here today. I'm disappointed in where we're at. I really am. The way this should have been dealt with, and I think Mr. Lawler deserves a fair chance. He deserves a say. You deserve a debate in this whole tax policy thing. And I think last night was unfortunate. I mean, we brought a bill to the floor under suspension. We didn't bring it through this committee. We should have brought it through this committee. I think, and I didn't vote for the bill last night. It's going to increase the debt. There was some discussion earlier about some pay for, and the Democrats may have had a pay for to solve this problem. When we talk about pay fors here, we talk about reducing something that's not paid for in exchange for spending some money that's not paid for. And the pay-fors are all mostly just a joke, frankly. So I also don't get too caught up in pay-fors. I try to look at what the actual impact on the debt is. And I can tell you, unfortunately, the bill that passed last night is going to increase the debt. There should have been more debate on that. We should have brought that. It's a pretty comprehensive tax bill. We should have brought it through this committee. We really should have. And we should have allowed Mr. Lawler an amendment on that. He should have been allowed a debate in the Ways and Means Committee. And I think it's unfortunate that our chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is not here to talk about this. I would love to hear the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee tell us what he thinks of this so that we could have a fulsome debate about this and how it relates to the bill that we passed last night. But we don't have that. So I think this, we're in an unfortunate situation. The chairman of this committee is doing and has done his best in this situation to accommodate what outside of this committee is a broken process. I think inside of this committee, the drafting of this rule, in times before, we would have done it a lot differently and not nearly as well. So this rule is, I think, as good as can be under the situation, but the situation is unfortunate. And if I could talk about the policy a little bit, and then this would be the part where I disagree with Mr. Lawler, and he and I understand that and have respect for each other's positions. I believe it's bad policy. It was good policy when we capped the SALT deduction in the Trump-Pence tax bill. That was good policy. And it was proposed as one of the pay-fors for some of the other stuff, as we're talking about pay-fors here. But one of the ways I look at the SALT tax is people in New York, because their taxes are high, they get to pay less federal tax versus somebody in Kentucky making the exact same salary, let's say. Salary differences on average notwithstanding, but somebody in Kentucky making $300,000 and paying federal taxes is going to pay more to support our military, the national defense, than is somebody in New York making $300,000 and paying federal taxes because of the SALT tax deduction. Now, is that equitable or not? The people in Kentucky would think not, that everybody should share equally in the burden, for instance, of our national defense or the defense of our borders or some of the other, NASA, some of the other federal programs. So I think it's bad policy for that reason. It actually encourages in the long run. I know in the short run there's benefits to people from New York and California and New Jersey, but in the long run there's a perverse incentive for those states to raise their taxes even more. Makes it easier for those politicians to get away with it. And I know Mr. Lawler opposes those tax increases very much so. And then finally, the bad policy here underlying, and I know we're here to talk about procedure, not policy, but we always do talk about the policy of the underlying bill. It's going to increase the debt. It will increase the debt. I don't want to misquote Mr. Lawler, but I think he said it was going to cost $7 billion. Is that right? So, and when we say cost, it's not really fair to say cost, because we're letting people keep more of their money, but the net effect on our budget is going to be $7 billion if this happens on the floor. And I find it interesting, like virtually every Democrat in this committee would vote for this bill if it gets to the floor, and they're here pounding against the bill. So I appreciated Mr. Rushenthaler's comments. I won't repeat them. But this is something the Democrats will vote for on the floor. The question is, will they vote for the rule on the floor? And I think that's where we're getting in trouble here, is I disagree with bringing this bill in front of this committee at 8 a.m. because, and I understand the frustration of the people from New York and why they got to where they got to, which is they suspended the passage of a rule that had nothing to do with this bill for a moment in time in order to get the attention that they were not given, the due attention they were not given in the Ways and Means Committee, the due attention they were not given by bringing that rule through this committee and allowing them to have an up or down vote on this issue. It's unfortunate that they got to that point and they engaged in suspending the passage of a rule in order to cause this meeting, but here we are. And the question is, do we reward that? And this is, these are the things that I'm weighing. Do you reward somebody who threatens passage of unrelated legislation with a hearing on the topic that they care about and their constituents care about? And it's unfortunate if this chamber, and by chamber I mean the House in general, not the Rules Committee. I think we're doing the best in a bad situation right now. But it's unfortunate in this chamber that we're kind of at that point where people feel like they have to do that. And it's because we didn't have regular order on that tax bill that we are here trying to create a substitute for regular order. That's exactly why we're here. We didn't do a rule on the tax bill. Should have done a rule on the tax bill we passed last night. Could have weighed things. We could have possibly come up with some kind of compromise where, don't want to call it a pay for, but where the Democrats give up a little bit and the Republicans from New York get something and the overall impact on our budget could have been less. We didn't do that. I should have been here doing that. So I guess that's all I have to say on this, and I'm looking forward to more quotes from Twitter and the Hill rags. It's unfortunate, as I began with, that in this digital age, we don't have their materials to line our bird cages anymore. But that's the due respect that they deserve in these hearings where we consider very important issues very important to people from New York. And I do appreciate the passion and the diligence with which Mr. Lawler is pursuing this issue for his constituents, even though I disagree with him on the policy. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have.
I'll begin by yielding to our ranking member.
So the gentleman asked, how would we vote on the rule? Well, you made it easy for us to vote no because you couldn't help yourselves. You had to slip in another gratuitous, nasty attack on President Biden and his, and your disagreements with him on his energy policy. So this is not a rule that will be brought to the floor just on the provision we're talking about. You loaded it up with another meaningless, non-binding attack. So yeah, I expect every Democrat to vote no on this. And by the way, we're not bringing down Republican rules. You are. You're the ones who bring down Republican rules on a regular basis. So, yeah, we'll have no problem voting against a rule that brings to the floor a bill that is a politically charged attack on the president that is non-binding, but you just can't help yourselves. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And I think it really is important to think about the second emergency matter that we're dealing with today, because I don't know that it's an emergency when the United States has had record production of crude oil, 13.2 million barrels a day, more than Russia or Saudi Arabia. Oops, that's the next one, right? So we'll get to that, but that's the other thing, right, is that this is not an emergency, but what we are dealing with is a lot of statements that seem to be the opposite of what reality is. And so I really appreciate the representative from Kentucky's feeling of discomfort over this process. But in the end, the question will be how the representative from Kentucky, who is bothered so much by this process, will actually vote. And it is the vote that will say whether this process is endorsed, not whatever is in Punch Bowl. What is the final vote? And the other thing that we come to is with regards to this bill itself, we need to remember Representative Lawler went through why it's so awful, the SALT bill. The SALT bill, the SALT cap, Trump tax cuts, right? It was Republicans who imposed this cap. And why did they do that? They did that so they could push through the tax cuts that primarily benefited the wealthy. Is that right, Representative Schneider?
It's true.
That's a good that's a nice and easy thing. The reason we are here today on this issue that Representative Lawler is so upset about for his constituents is because his own party and the likely nominee of that party prioritized wealthy corporations and the most wealthy in their tax cuts. And then with regards to those who care about the deficit that we heard about today, remember, it's the Bush tax cuts, it's the Trump tax cuts that represent about 56% of what the deficit is. That's what we need to come back to. That is where the deficit has its biggest roots. And if we actually repealed those tax cuts for the wealthiest corporations who do not pay any taxes, we would actually be on our way to a better fiscal policy once and again. This gives us an opportunity not to talk about the emergency, but really about the priorities. Because the priorities of the Democratic Party are always standing with the working families, with the regular folks, as we say, not with those richest corporations. Every time we come in this Rules Committee, they're bringing us bills that like favor the banks over the consumers. They're constantly attacking the consumer, the agencies that protect the consumers, and said, no, let's go with the banks. And so this problem that is faced by Representative Lawler and many other constituents is not of our making. It's of the Republican Party and their priority for the wealthy. That is why we're here. And with regards to emergencies and the idea that this is an emergency and we didn't have emergencies, I'm sorry. During the 117th Congress, there was actually a real emergency going on, and it was called a pandemic. It was called a pandemic. And we were having to deal with making sure that our economy did not go off a cliff. And thanks to Democratic policies, we did not go off that cliff. Thanks to Democratic policies, people didn't get kicked out of their homes and evicted, which was one of our emergencies that we dealt with. Thanks to Democratic policies, we have added more jobs than any other president. Thanks to Democratic policies, we averted a fiscal and economic emergency. And I want to, Representative Schneider, I think you might have wanted to respond to some of the issues that were raised.
Thank you. It was raised earlier about this idea of folks in some states paying more in taxes than others. The states that are most affected by this SALT deduction cap are, first of all, they tend to be blue states, but states like Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, Minnesota. And they're also the states that pay more to the federal government than they get back in return. And just a quick look. New York, Mr. Lawler's state, only gets back 74 cents on every dollar paid in taxes. Minnesota, Ms. Fishbaugh State, gets back 69 cents. Illinois gets back only 60 cents. Massachusetts gets back only 54 cents. Kentucky, where the claim was made that this is, the SALT deduction is unfair, the high-tax states are taking advantage of other states, Kentucky gets $1.89. In reality, it's the states that are being penalized by this SALT gap are subsidizing states like Kentucky. And it is double taxation unfair, subsidization unfair, and we need to repeal the SALT cap.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. And, you know, I do agree with the representative from Kentucky, as I would have liked to have had the bill that we passed yesterday come through this committee, because I would have liked to have seen us improve the child tax credit. Because when Democrats passed their child tax credit under Democratic leadership in the House, we did so much more for our children. We focused on the children, gave more to the children than we did to the big corporations. And I voted for that tax because I'm going to, that tax cut and what we did last night, because I'm always going to be for the kids. But just difference in priorities, what we did when we were in control, the kids got a whole lot more. We brought a lot more children out of poverty. And I look forward to the day that we get the gavels back and we actually bring many more children and make a bigger tax cut for middle Americans and low-income Americans than we did last night. So that I do agree with my Kentucky representative. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
You, gentleman from South Carolina, is recognized for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, let me just mention that, as was brought up yesterday in the Budget Committee, under the Trump tax cuts, it brought in an extra $1 trillion of income that would not have been there. You know, and I guess I get the Democrats always speak of the rich, the corporations. I don't think you understand corporations don't pay tax. It's the everyday mom and pop that invest in stocks that pay tax. It's not the corporations themselves. And I think it's kind of ironic. You talk about, you know, this hearing being, you know, out of order. And I would have preferred going through regular order. I would have preferred on the tax bill that we voted on yesterday, I voted against. I thought it should go, and I made that known at caucus meeting. But be that as it is, Ms. Gallen, I wish we were debating national security here. I wish we were debating the high price of gas and oil. I wish we were debating the border control. We've got an administration that is completely out of control. The people know it. The words cannot mask over what this administration has done to this country. And yes, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, to our children. When I see the on TV, and I could care less about what the rag says. I don't care. They're going to do what they're going to do. But when I see in New York, police officers who put their lives on the line being beat up by illegals, when I see the 4,000 children that were displaced, that displaced 2,000 children of Americans who paid into the tax system, they support our country. They pay into our Social Security, our Medicaid, our Medicare. When I see all the damage that this administration is doing to this country, to offer a small tax cut basically to the states that Mr. Lawler represents, I will gladly do that because it's the right thing to do. Name me one, go on Main Street, USA, you tell me, let them explain to you how life is better now under the Biden regime. They will not tell you that. I'm in the real estate business. I'm from a state that is getting people coming in. And I'm sorry, the paychecks have diminished. What they're paying at gas to foreign countries that don't like us, the threat that we're under, and it's not a laughing matter. The threats that we're under today that are here and now are directly a result of an administration that's gone off the rails, and that is, it's going to be hard to walk it back. The next administration hopefully will be a different one that will walk back what the damage that this administration has done. But I defend what Mr. Lawler is doing. I told him, I'd rather have it go through regular order, as I would everything. But under Nancy Pelosi, how much regular order did we have? We had closed rules. We couldn't offer amendments. And I was one of the ones that with Kevin McCarthy, was one of the big issues we had with him. Along with a host, that was one of the issues, a host of other issues, like putting forward term limits, like single subject amendments, like reallocating the MTV, which at the end of the day did him in. But bottom line, there were a host of other things that we asked for. All of us did, or the three of us here did. So, no, to offer this small tax advantage that's going to expire in 25 anyway, I will do this all day long. Voted against the tax bill yesterday. I didn't agree with a lot of it. A lot of it I did, but for the most part, I did not. So I just offer that, and I unabashedly support this. And to hear the words that come out of my friends on the other aisle is really astounding.
The gentleman,
So, yes, sir.
Well, I would just say, with respect to one piece of data, House Republicans have had more closed rules to date than House Democrats did in the 117th Congress. So I'm just, facts are facts. You can talk about regular order and your complaints under Speaker Pelosi, but the data is the data. You've had more closed rules to date than House Democrats did in the 117th Congress. House Republicans haven't brought successfully a bill through a rule, but 8 months, May, I think, of last year. So, I just want to make sure that's clear.
Sure. And the ranking member mentioned that, we don't have the assurances it's going to pass in the next House. When do we ever have assurances that anything's going to pass? I can't judge that. But all I can say is on this, and what is amazing is it's a novel idea to give money back to the taxpayer from y'all's end of the spectrum. We want to give money back to the taxpayer. They earned it. And the answer of my Democrat colleagues, tax more, tax Rich tax everybody.
Would the gentleman yield?
And that's I'll give you time. I'm
yes,
more than
sir.
happy to. But to hear under Democrats, the children are going to be better, the economy's going to be better. Tell me how you back that up with what's happened over the last 3 years. You cannot. I yield to Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Norman. And at the beginning of your conversation, you said that I didn't understand that corporations don't pay taxes, but individuals and families do, something like that.
No,
But I think those were your words, and maybe you meant something else.
No, here's.
Part of our problem is indeed that corporations are supposed to pay taxes, right? That in order to have a tax regime that is fair for everybody, we think that there should be a fair tax policy, and that we should have those who can afford more pay more, and those who can't pay their fair share, but they should not be paying more. The famous, the secretary should not be paying more as a percentage than the CEO, and that happens too often. And corporations, the Trump tax cuts took it from 35% to 21%. And then we have, I think it's the top 50 corporations actually don't even pay that. There are too many loopholes. It is an unfair system. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a fair system so that you don't have the wealthiest corporations getting away with paying nothing. And that is what we are constantly raising as a problem. And you were going to yield to...
Well,
I want to give
let
you-
me just
As a
respond.
co-accuser.
Yeah, I'll give
See,
Mr. Goose.
this is what happens when you sit next to him. You start getting into this whole call.
I'm just saying, what I mentioned was, you keep hearing corporations, don't pay their fair share. Look, corporations have stockholders. The profits flow to the stockholders, and they pay the share of tax. The stockholders are the ones that pay for this country. They're the ones that they carry this country. So when you say that, I hope you do know that corporations themselves now, if they're private companies, yes, they pay. How do you explain the $1 trillion extra income that we had under the Trump tax cuts? I don't think you can. What you're talking about is socialism. Government run everything. And that's I mean it, that's basically what you're talking about.
I actually am a big fan of capitalists. I am a capitalist. I believe that what we have, though, right now is we have a system where we don't have enough competition. The essence of capitalism is a lot of competition, and we don't have it. We have too many big corporations that control. So that's just on the socialism part. With regards, I will send to you, I don't have it here, I often enter it into the record. There is actually a good analysis that has been done that shows that the Trump tax credits, while more money came in, it was below the projected revenues. So their projected revenues fell and less money came in, and those tax cuts have not trickled down. But that's another, we have gone beyond.
I want to just talk about this.
I will move.
I'd like to yield to Mr. Neguse.
I think the gentleman, I just had one question about the bill itself. It sounds like you're supportive of it. I think you described it as a tax cut, for certain folks.
Small tax
Small
cut.
tax cut of relaxing this, the cap, right, on salt. And it sounds like you support that. Why did you cap it in the first place?
Let Mr. Lawler.
Well, no, I was asking, you were in Congress. I wasn't.
I supported the cap. But we were
That's what
not.
I'm saying. Why did you, it sounds like you support relaxing the cap now. You're
Now.
saying you want to do a tax. But then why did you vote when Donald Trump proposed to cap this in the first place? Republicans all voted en masse to cap salt. And now, 4 years later, 5 years later, you're here telling me that now it's a tax cut, that you voted, so you voted to increase taxes before, but now you want to cut them? I don't understand.
Very good question. I voted to put the caps on because I didn't think the blue states should be bailed out
But now
for
you
high
do.
tax policy. Look what's happened in the last 4 years under your administration.
Okay,
The
so
Biden
you're-
administration, name me one person who's not paying. The Americans are suffering, and it's not just the blue states, Mr. Goose. It's all over the country. That's why the situation has changed. So that's very easily explained.
All right. I think I yield back to the gentleman. Appreciate it.
Ms. Lawler, would you like to say anything? And by the way, I admire your fever. You're battling to give money back to now, I will say, to be upfront, back in the day with Trump was here, if you would make the same argument, I would tell you I'm not supporting him. So,
No, look, the cost of living has gone up exponentially in this country in just the last 3 years. When you increase spending by $5 trillion in 2 years, and you create record inflation, and the cost of goods and the cost of housing goes up, the people are struggling under the $10,000 cap. I want to make a few points. Number one, SALT applies to everyone, not just New York, not just California, not just Illinois or Minnesota or New Jersey. It applies to everyone. This is not targeted just to these blue states. Everyone qualifies for the $10,000 cap, everyone. So the issue is that married couples are being penalized because if they file jointly, they are only qualified for $10,000. That is why I introduced the bill, to eliminate the marriage penalty, which exists. There are multiple marriage penalties within the tax code. This is but one of them. But in my opinion, this will provide immediate tax relief. I would also note, this is not about wealthy New Yorkers. Number one, we put an income cap at $500,000. Number two, you have firefighters, police officers, teachers supporting lifting the cap on SALT, because in areas like mine, where we pay the highest property taxes in America, where we have high income taxes, where we have high business taxes, people are struggling under the weight, under the cost of this. This is about providing relief to working families, middle-class families. And I just find it alarming that we have people on the Democratic side who often talk about the need to provide relief for middle-class families, that they would belittle or oppose this in any way. Now, I've heard from the ranking member that this is about my election or the election of my colleagues. I've won twice in 2-to-1 Democratic districts. I'm not worried about winning again. My constituents know who I am. They understand why I'm here. They sent me here for good reason. The reason we won and the reason we're in the majority is because of the failed Democratic policies in states like New York. High crime, high taxes, a migrant crisis that Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, said is destroying the city. Why? Because of sanctuary city policies or refusal to cooperate with ICE, using billions in taxpayer money to provide free housing, free clothing, free food, free education to illegal immigrants, while cutting state school aid to hardworking middle-class families. I am trying to provide tax relief for them. It's why I supported the bill last night. It's why I fought from the moment I got here to get SALT relief. We should all embrace that. The taxpayers are struggling in this country.
well, not only struggling, particularly in New York, since and a lot of it is self-inflicted wounds with sanctuary cities. I hope y'all will take care of the ones that supported that and get it back on the financial track. There is nothing free in this country. Everything has got a cost to it. And so I hope you will correct that and use this. And it may be top secret, but I'm gonna vote for this. The body needs to be able to vote for this. I'm gonna vote for the rule, and we'll see how my Democrat friends, how they do on that. Now, after we get it to the floor, and it's before the whole body, which they deserve a right to vote, since it's not offset, I'm voting against it. I'm telling you that. And I told Mr. Lawler that. But he is fighting for his people. He is fighting to give them money back under circumstances that were directly related or the cause of what this administration is doing to this country. There just happens to be they're suffering more than any. The license plates I have in South Carolina now, New York. California is a close second. You're having a mass exodus. Why is that? Because of the policies. And this is a small, and I've told my friends on both sides, this is a small thing to do to help the people, his constituents that he's fighting for. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas, recognized for any questions he may have.
First, let me just say I would associate myself to remarks of the gentleman from Kentucky and South Carolina about my appreciation for what you, Mr. Lawler, have been doing and trying to promote what I think is most obviously to anyone viewing a sincere belief and effort to represent your constituents here, which is what we're supposed to do in our Republican form of government, and fight for them and what they're telling you that they care about and what you see that they care about. I think, as the gentleman knows, I've been working as much as I know how to work in recent days and over the recent months to try to figure out how to answer this particular question for you and for some other colleagues. And I'll admit here in front of God and this panel and everybody watching that I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted because I want you to get the vote. I don't believe this is how we should be doing it. I believe, like the gentleman from Kentucky, that we should have had a more open rule on the tax bill that we voted on last night. I believe we should have had amendments and had the ability to let this play out and let people figure out where we were going to end up on some of these. I don't think we've had as many what you might call open or at least structured rules, quasi-open, whatever you want to call it, as we should, this Congress. I do believe that we had moved a good number of things in a good direction for a while in terms of, we had 1,100 votes on amendments, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would say that they didn't get all the ones that they want, and I get that, and that's how this works when we go through the process, but could be better, could be worse. But yeah, I think, we had 10 appropriations bills get out of committees, 7 that got off the floor. I think some things were moving in the right direction, and unfortunately that came to a halt. And so now we're doing everything essentially by suspension of the rules. I mean, that's pretty much all we've done since, November 1, effectively. And so that's what we did last night. We passed a massive tax bill by suspension of the rules. By the way, on a very bipartisan basis. I mean, I do want to point out that more Democrats than Republicans voted last night for a bill that had massive tax advantages for corporations. That's just true. 180-something Democrats, 170-something Republicans voted for that bill. And I voted against it for reasons that are well publicized last night and on the floor and otherwise about my concerns about the child tax credit, its expansion, its applicability to parents who are here illegally, who have children that were born here. And we can debate those policies, but it's just fact is we just did it on suspension. People say, well, why would you claim time in opposition to the bill? Well, because somebody should. Somebody should. What happens in this town is we do things like that, and you go down to the floor, and then there's two parties, and they bring it up together, and then they split the time, and then it's just share the time, and there's a kumbaya, and everybody does their 1-minute speech, and then they send it out to constituents. Which constituents? I don't know, the K Street constituents, and say, look, we got your expensing, we got your R&D, we got your interest deduction, and then the average hardworking American out there is going, what the hell did I get? That's the truth. And we didn't have an open process, we didn't have amendments, we didn't have the ability to make changes that we ought to do for the hardworking families out there. Meanwhile, I have to oppose the bill for the reasons I explained last night on the floor. So now here we are, and we've got to make a decision about this. And if we're going to have a debate about SALT, then we ought to have a debate about SALT in the context of all of the other issues. I think it's important to have this debate about the essentially marriage penalty, if you will, on this. It's real, and it does affect some what you would call middle-income earners, but it also affects people who are not middle-income earners. There's a cap on this one. I'm trying to process the cap. It's $500,000. I put it in the context. I have no idea. I haven't been able to study it. I haven't been able to look at it and see, well, what's the actual impact? How much of this is going to wealthy earners? How much of this is going to middle-income earners? I think our whole system is pretty corrupted, by the way, from top to bottom. As I said in the Budget Committee, my Democratic colleagues will sit there and say, you can't even mention the word Social Security and Medicare when we're talking about literally voting on a debt commission. You can't mention it. But on the other side of the aisle, you can't mention taxes, or I don't know, Grover Norquist is going to come after you with some sort of, hammer or something for violation of some pledge you took 12 years ago. And this is where we are in this town. And the point is, we ought to actually sit down and figure out what we're going to do. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I've said repeatedly in this room, these complaints about how the tax cuts of Bush, Trump, or any otherwise have somehow harmed our ability to have revenue is belied by the evidence of the highest revenue we've ever had, like upwards of 20% of GDP. Like just the math, the charts put out by the Federal Reserve belies the very accusation that somehow tax cuts are in and of themselves restrictive of revenue as opposed to potentially causing additional revenue because you're allowing people to create wealth. I might disagree with where some of those things are allocated. Maybe more should be for small businesses. Maybe more should be for different things. But have that debate. But don't sit there and just throw out these accusations that somehow having tax relief, including the ones yesterday that 188 or whatever the number was Democrats voted for, that the expensing issues, the R&D issues, that doesn't create economic growth. Can we at least acknowledge that a bunch of my Democratic colleagues believe that? They do. They're on the floor saying so. They're out talking about it. It's true. So let's just stop the oh, well, that means this is all stuff that's just to benefit corporations. Look, I'm not sure here the right approach. I do not believe this is regular order in any way, shape, or form, because I literally have no idea the impact of this legislation as I sit here and look at it, because we didn't do it through regular order, didn't go through a committee. I don't have the report sitting there saying this is what this bill will do. I don't have the CBO score. I don't have the time to look at it. To the extent it's a 72-hour rule, it's okay. It's only if we don't vote on this until next week, but we didn't get the benefit of that here in the rule, debating the rule in the Rules Committee. And I just think that's a problem. I think this is not the way we should be doing things. And I don't think the vote last night is the way we should be doing things. And I think there are so many areas here where we could actually have bipartisan or at least multiple forces within the conference, despite our violent disagreements on a lot of different things, be able to come together on some of these issues to make a good decision for the American people. Like, biggest applause line I get if I go out and talk to constituents at home is banning stock trading among members of Congress. And I get it out there, and that's Abigail and I have that bill, and others do, and it's like, well, are we ever going to have that conversation or debate? I don't know. Ask the Uniparty. I'm not sure. But there are ways here to try to find a path forward on some of the things we agree on. But jamming through this rule on, at 9:30 in the morning on Thursday on a fly-out day is not how I prefer to do things. So I'm conflicted, not 100% sure what my vote will look like here or on the floor. I'm figuring that out based on what I'm listening to today. But I want to say for the record that, I've had Mr. Lawler has been 100% forthcoming with us, colleagues, like what he wants to accomplish. I applaud his efforts to do that. I'd like to see us have votes on these measures so that we can debate them. There are pieces, I do believe that, last point I'll make, this stuff, there's a reason a lot of people have been fleeing, and I think Mr. Lawler, you might agree, fleeing New York to jurisdictions like Florida or South Carolina or Texas. And one of those reasons is the high tax rates. Well, part of that, right, is once you remove the federal subsidization of those high rates, right, then that suddenly is hitting even harder. So people go, well, gosh, I'd really like to be in Florida with 0% income tax, or I'm going to be in Tennessee with 0% income tax or lower property taxes. Texas, we've got 0% income tax, but our property taxes are pretty daggum high. And so, this actually would hit home with some of my constituents, right? Some of my constituents who are in that kind of upper middle would say, I might get a little benefit out of this bill that you're suggesting. But I haven't been able to process that or analyze it and think about it on a macroeconomic scale across the nation. And that is what's bothersome to me. Again, we're supposed to go this process so we can do that. So I applaud what you're trying to do. If I end up voting against the rule, it's not because of you, and it's not out of disrespect for anybody or it's just trying to make sure that we can try to fix this place. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Lawler, is this a new concept that you have brought to the table today? Is it new?
No, this is a bill that I originally introduced in January of 2023. It was the very first bill that I introduced, and I think I've introduced over 40 some odd bills since. But this is the first bill I introduced because it is the most important to my constituents, Republicans and Democrats and independents. It is the issue I hear the most about when I am in my district. I know that it is the issue that Mr. Lawler hears the most about, that Mr. D'Esposito hears the most about, that Mr. Garbarino hears the most about when we are home in our districts.
So does it predate you, though, coming to Congress?
Absolutely. This issue, obviously, as has been discussed, was a major source of debate and discussion in 2017 during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And since, I believe, you know, we had Democratic members who said salt or bust and then proceeded to bust. So it's been around a long time.
So we've heard some talk about, you know, this being a 1,000-page bill that was brought in the dark of night. I think if you could, Mr. Lawler, just read for the American people this 2-page bill that is so complex.
I will. To amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to modify the limitation on the amount certain married individuals can deduct from state and local taxes, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Section 1, short title. This act may be cited as the SALT Marriage Penalty Elimination Act. Section 2, modification or limitation on deduction for certain state and local taxes. Section A, subset A, in general, Section 164B6 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by adding at the end the following, quote, in the case of a joint return for a taxable year beginning after December 31st, 2022 and before January 1st, 2024, if the taxpayer's adjusted gross income for such taxable years less than $500,000, subparagraph B shall be applied by substituting 20,000 for 10,000, end quote. Effective date, the amendment made by this section shall apply to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2022, period.
Is that it?
That's it.
So it's not a 1,000-page bill, it's a 1.5-page bill. Is that correct, Mr. Lawler?
That is correct.
And normally in our committees, we have 5 minutes to question, but in the Rules Committee, we have unlimited amounts of time. But even if I were only given 5 minutes, you read that within a 5-minute time frame.
Correct.
So I think it's pretty ridiculous to say that this is a new concept because it has predated you, and I know personally that you've been working on this issue since you came to Congress. In fact, you have to have been under a rock to not know that Mr. Laloda, Mr. Lawler, Mr. D'Esposito, Mr. Molinaro, and Mr. Garbarino, you'd have to have been under a rock to not know that they have been fighting on this issue since their first day in Congress. So I certainly support your efforts on behalf of your constituents. I do think we're hearing a little bit of doublespeak from our friends on the other side of the aisle who are saying they are doing all they can on this issue, yet they aren't willing to give a 1-year extension, and they are just beside themselves on this, very lengthy 1.5-page bill. So thank you, Mr. Lawler, for your efforts on behalf of your constituents. I will support this rule today to give you an opportunity to make your case. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, thank you very much. I find myself in always the unenviable position at the end of the dais, and we've had a great deal of debate today. I just want to say the following. Thank you, Mr. Lawler, for your tireless advocacy for the people of the state of New York. This was an unfair policy when this deduction was taken away, and this starts to right the wrong with the marriage penalty being eliminated. And it's going to help constituents if we can make this law. This should have been in the overall tax package is my strong feeling and belief, and I know the advocacy that's come out of Mr. Laloda, Mr. D'Esposito, yourself, Mr. Molinaro, Mr. Garbarino has been tireless as you fought for
New York taxpayers. And I greatly appreciate that. I salute you for your time here today, and certainly taking the heat from people all over the country here today. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, I want to correct my friend. I do not think of you as sitting at the end of the dais. I think of you as the anchor on the ship that steadies us in the storm. So we're happy to have you there. My friend requests recognition.
I just, for the record, because there's a lot of revisionist history here, I mean, we are here today because of the Trump tax bill that was jammed through the Senate on reconciliation that created this problem. So for all the finger pointing at Joe Biden, I mean, you guys who were here to vote for that horrible bill, it's your responsibility. The second thing I'm going to say is that listening to my friends on the Republican side, it's like you're not in charge. I mean, you are, I hate that this is the reality, but you are in control of the House of Representatives. The Ways and Means Committee, which Mr. Schneider is a member of and Mr. Lawler is not, it actually does the tax stuff around here. So let's not lose sight of like who's running this place. So anyway, I appreciate you allowing me to have that indulgence, but I just the record needs to be straight here on what the reality is. And I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll just add, if I may, that I'm very proud of the Trump tax cut, very proud to have voted for it. I think it unleashed incredible amounts of growth for this country and additional income for the federal government. And frankly, I think it's helped us revive some of the disastrous decisions that were made during the Biden administration. I know they certainly didn't overturn it, for the most part. They left it in place and certainly spent the revenue that it generated and then some on top of that. So in terms of, the SALT tax thing, again, I admire my friend's persistence in fighting for his constituents. That's exactly what he's supposed to do. I'm not sure I share the view on SALT that my other friends do, but, again, that's fair enough. They had an opportunity to vote against it. Some of the very people you're talking about did not vote for the Trump tax cut because of the SALT issue. They were fighting for it then. Obviously, Mr. Lawler wasn't here to do that, but some of his predecessors and some of his current colleagues certainly were. And again, that's fair enough. I mean, I don't agree with every single item in every bill that my own party brings forward. I sometimes fight against them too.
Did
we're in
Mr.
there.
Norman convince you?
I'm sorry?
Didn't Mr. Norman convince you to review your position?
I always find Mr. Norman and every member of this committee on both sides of the aisle very convincing in what they say because they're always sincere in the questions that they ask and the points that they raise. That's why we allow such unlimited debate and are so generous to everyone who comes before this committee. A precedent that I did not establish, my friend did not establish, but our good friend, our successor, Pete Sessions, our predecessor, did establish. And that's why this one of the reasons it's very unique and entertaining committee. But one thing my friend, from Texas did say was we were going to vote on this at 9:30 this morning. If we were a little less eloquent and a little shorter in our comments, that might have actually come true. But that's not going to happen today. We're going to vote a little bit later. But again, I want to thank both of our witnesses, and I mean that quite sincerely. We appreciate you both coming on such short notice early in the morning. Appreciate the quality of debate. Again, Mr. Lawler, this was your first time here. We congratulate you. You've been here before, Mr. Snyder, but I think this is your first time this Congress, if I recall correctly. So again, we're very happy to have you as well. And with that, the witnesses are excused. Okay. I'd like to welcome our next panel, the Vice Chairman of the Rules Committee, Dr. Burgess, and Representative Kathy Castor from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Do you want to offer your comments from the dais, or do you prefer the desk? Dr. Burgess, you ready? I welcome your testimony if you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am here today on behalf of Energy and Commerce Republicans to address the rather ill-timed presidential declaration from 1 week ago that restricted the sale of liquefied natural gas to nations around the world. The resolution that we have in front of us today presents an important opportunity for the debate and for the House of Representatives to send a clear message to the President that his actions are harmful to Americans. The resolution provides for the House to denounce the harmful anti-American energy policies of the Biden administration, for the House to denounce the irrational, unpredictable lockdown of federal lands by the administration, for the House to condemn the energy crisis plaguing families, businesses, Americans around the country that have been caused by this administration, and for the House to encourage domestic production of reliable and affordable energy sources. Mr. Chairman, America is blessed with tremendous natural resources and a free enterprise economic system that fosters innovative and technological entrepreneurship. Our American ingenuity has produced world-changing energy and technological advancement. We've harnessed the power of nuclear energy. We've electrified millions of rural Americans' homes. We've produced hydropower. We've ushered in the shale revolution. And that shale revolution continues to create millions of new jobs, bring manufacturing back to the United States, and to revitalize communities across the country. America is more energy secure today than ever before. Today, we are the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world. We've become a top energy exporter, which is helping shift markets and bolster our security against countries that do not like us, countries like Iran and Russia. The shale revolution, the affordable, reliable natural gas that American workers are now producing, has enabled America to reduce emissions more than any other nation, and we have the capacity to continue helping countries reduce their emissions even further. Yet the Biden administration is relentless in trying to throw all of this away. This resolution outlines the many ways President Biden has accomplished this, from his actions on day one to shut down the Keystone Pipeline, to curtailing oil permitting and production to onerous new emissions regulations. Just last week, the Biden administration announced a pause to any permits for liquefied natural gas exports, a move that enriches our adversaries. It actually jeopardizes our allies and threatens America's energy communities for their economic future. My colleagues on the other side of the dais in Energy and Commerce like to use the phrase people over politics, but actions speak louder than words. Mr. Chairman, the facts are clear. LNG exports will actually provide emerging nations with cleaner and more secure energy while strengthening our own economic and energy security. This is just the latest in a long line of examples of the president appeasing a political base at the expense of the American people. So I have one word: don't. This resolution presents a clear message and is worthy of floor consideration and debate. Let's stand up for the American people. Let's stand up for American energy and the benefits that that energy provides for a strong American future. Let us denounce the efforts to take that future away from our constituents. I thank the gentleman for the time, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Castor, you're recognized for your opening testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. It's a pleasure to be back here in the Rules Committee. Well, it's February 1, and what we have here is a Valentine from the extreme MAGA Republicans in the Congress to big oil and gas, and sometimes your unbounded ardor causes you to do irrational things like violate your own rules. I mean, this is a rush resolution, hasn't been to committee, and it is chock full of misinformation and untruths. The truth is that the Biden policies on energy are serving our constituents very well. Gas prices are down, clean energy is up. As my colleagues noted, oil and gas production by the U.S. is at record levels. But we have an emergency on our hands, and it's an emergency of the climate. There is no mention in this love letter, in this Valentine to big oil and gas, of the cost of climate to the folks we represent back home. Just last year, the climate impacts in 2023 cost Americans $92 billion in extreme events. This was unprecedented. We had over $28 billion disasters strike the U.S. We're talking extreme heat. For example, in the Phoenix area, they saw a record July average in Phoenix of over 100 degrees. Louisiana, Massachusetts, Texas, Mississippi, New Hampshire had their hottest years ever on record. In my neck of the woods, mega storms, these more intense hurricanes. You know, at the Fort Lauderdale airport, they had one day with 25 inches of rain. So you saw the airplanes that couldn't even park because of the extreme floods, droughts. The Mississippi River is at low levels, the lowest level in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Arkansas. That is impacting power production, that's impacting the ability to transport food. We have a severe drought in Lake Mead, Lake Powell, also impacting hydropower and the ability for people to get their drinking water. These climate impacts are going to continue to become more severe unless we cut pollution. And the good news is that we are doing both at the same time. We are being able to provide emergency supplies when Europe needed it, but now Europe has said we're set. We don't need any more gas. We already have so many LNG terminals in the pipeline that a lot of experts are saying we're overbuilt. So I hear the consternation of, gosh, the administration has put a temporary pause on some LNG terminals. But like I said, a lot of experts say these are overbuilt, we don't need them, and it is appropriate now for the administration to consider all of the impacts, not just, gosh, does it impact the bottom line of polluters? That's not the only consideration that should be analyzed by the United States. You need to consider, gosh, is this a way to help consumers? Is it a way to avoid these costly climate impacts? Is it a way to bolster our national security? So, Mr. Chairman and members, this is not ready for prime time. Like I said, these kind of love notes and Valentines don't serve the American people well. Instead, we need to be focused on doing everything we can, like the Biden administration is doing, like we did through the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, expanding cleaner, cheaper energy, providing our communities greater stability over time, reducing costly climate impacts, and really working in the public interest. So I urge you all to go back to the drawing board. This love letter, again, I think it shows the unbounded ardor. There's this irrational response. It's not, it doesn't serve Americans well, and I urge you to defeat it today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Dr. Burgess, last year, or actually for last decade, has emissions of green gas from the United States gone up or down?
Down. Since 2005, year over year, the United States has reduced carbon emissions more so than all other nations on the face of the earth combined.
And Dr. Burgess, what role, if any, did natural gas play in that lowering of greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, it was critical. I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee since 2005. That was the year we passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which actually allowed for the beginning of the shale revolution. We didn't know that at the time. In fact, the concern was that we were running out of natural gas in this country, and they were going to require importation of large amounts of natural gas from the North Sea. In fact, Mr. McGovern's colleague Ed Markey, when he was on our committee in 2005, would continuously rail against us on the Republican side of the dais because we're going to be bringing these big liquefied natural gas ships into Boston Harbor, putting a school at the top of the hill at risk, and we were going to one day blow that up and be the biggest mass murder since Adolf Hitler. Obviously, none of that has happened. But what did happen, the policies in the Energy Policy Act of 2005 allowed for the scientific breakthroughs that became fracking and horizontal drilling to become a reality. And within 2 years' time, the price of natural gas had plummeted and there was abundant natural gas in this country. We need to embrace that technological advance that our scientists, our engineers, our technicians produced and not cripple them with basically a press release. It wasn't even an executive order this time. It was a press release a week ago. And it's precisely that time frame, a week ago, issuing a press release that is going to stop the exportation of liquefied natural gas. That's precisely the reason that we need to be considering this on an urgent basis.
And when, Dr. Burgess, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, and what action did they take with respect to natural gas that Europeans who opposed that invasion do? Did they continue to supply that gas to our European friends and allies when they were resisting aggression on their continent?
Well, there are some who would argue that the completion of the Nord Stream 2, which was allowed under the Biden administration, actually emboldened the Russians to make that invasion. After the invasion occurred, people were horrified and said, no, we're not going to buy Russian natural gas. Where are you going to go to get your natural gas? The good news is there was liquefied natural gas on the seas, ready to go, ready to deliver. Germany built an import terminal in literally weeks' time to be able to serve their citizens last winter. They were very grateful to get Oklahoma and Texas gas to their shores.
Do you think they would have been in a position to sustain resistance to Russia if there had not been American natural gas available for export?
I'm not a geopolitical expert, but as a simple country doctor, I'm going to tell you there is no way that they could have sustained without the United States being able to provide this resource.
And in respect to climate change, are there other countries in the world that are using primarily coal-based power right now that might benefit by using natural gas in terms of lowering greenhouse emissions?
It continues to this day. I don't recall if the ranking member was on the Energy and Commerce Committee when Henry Waxman and Ed Markey brought their cap and trade bill through the Energy and Commerce Committee in 2009. That was a bill that was supposed to really curtail carbon emissions in this country with a cap and trade scheme. The fact of the matter is it passed in the House, probably cost some people their re-elections that year, but it never was taken up in the Senate because they were horrified by what this might do to their electoral prospects. And so cap and trade never became the law of the land. But here's the interesting thing. If you put side by side what was projected under Waxman-Markey and what has actually occurred under the shale revolution, we've done better than Waxman-Markey.
And, just out of curiosity, because I have my own opinions, I can certainly make them clear. Do you think the executive order last week, was it all political, had anything to do with the next election?
Don't get me started. It wasn't an executive order. Here, I've got it right here. It's a
press release, excuse me. Thank you for the correction.
And it came out the same day that my governor, Greg Abbott, took control of a park in Eagle Pass, Texas, because he was being hammered by people coming across the border without benefit of permission, all of which is the responsibility of the federal government. President Biden would not lift a finger to help Texas. Governor Abbott did the correct thing under the Constitution, declared an invasion, and said, I'm taking control of this park. We are not letting unbridled amounts of people in. And it was interesting because the week before, we'd been down to the border with the Speaker of the House. I'd not been to Eagle Pass previously. I've done multiple border trips over the years, but I'd not been to Eagle Pass. The views on the television from a week before, 10 days before, tens of thousands of people were aggregated on the United States side of the bank of the Rio the Texas side of the Rio Grande River, for processing to be brought into this country. It was really a startling number of people that were gathered there. Speaker of the House goes to Eagle Pass, Texas, and suddenly that problem doesn't exist anymore. The holding areas were still there. The orange webbing to hold people in place was still present, but there were no people. So if you can control the border when the Speaker of the House is coming for a visit, you can control it every day of the week. And that's the infuriating thing about the position taken by the Biden administration. So understandably, Governor Abbott has done what he has had to do to forestall this invasion and to prevent this invasion. And as a consequence, what does he get? Joe Biden declares war on Texas energy, trying to eviscerate the economy of our state. Why is he doing that? I have no good reason other than he's getting very, very poor advice from his advisors in the White House.
Well, there's a lot of speculation that it was done for political purposes, that it was done because there was declining support among younger voters and environmental groups, and it was done under pressure from those groups. So I'm not surprised that there's a congressional response to a blatantly political calculation by the administration, because it's, it effectively reverses our policy of trying to lower greenhouse emissions around the world, to try and make sure that free countries are energy independent, that those that aren't have a source of supply. Frankly, it vindicates the decision of this Congress years ago to lift the ban on the export of oil and natural gas. And with all due respect to my friends who'd like to tell us how much is being produced, that's not because of the Biden administration. That's in spite of the Biden administration. Nobody in the industry would regard this as a remotely friendly executive branch where oil and gas is concerned. And I would remind everybody, too, that while we have a lot of consuming states represented up here, happy to enjoy the benefits of lower-priced gasoline and lower-priced heating and cooling, courtesy of people that actually produce the energy, when in many cases in your own states you do not. So please don't lecture us on the product that you buy that provides you a comfortable living, that's also lowering greenhouse emissions around the world, and attack the very companies and the very workers who actually produce that, and that's how they make their living. And they've contributed mightily, probably the best geopolitical advantage that the United States has had in the last 15 years is the movement to energy independence. And again, that was not by government policy. That was in spite of government policy. It was driven entirely by the private sector and, frankly, the genius and the productivity and creativity and hard work of the American people. I know Dr. Burgess and I represent many of the people that do that. I know my friend in New Mexico represents many of the people who provide that kind of advantage to the United States, energy security and, frankly, lowering greenhouse emissions. So we're at a loss when we're condemned for doing what we're asked to do by the market and by the consumers. Do it, lower the price, and create security for the country and bring down greenhouse emissions. And it's, gosh, we're terrible people. It's a terrible industry, and it mystifies us a great deal in our part of the world. So anyway, I applaud the resolution. I think it's well thought through. I think the timing was dictated by the press release. This wasn't something we just dreamed up politically. It was the press release that was political. It was the response that was legitimate. So I look forward to voting for this on the floor. I appreciate my friend being up here and testifying, both my friends being up here and testifying, but I find myself much more persuaded by my friend, Dr. Burgess. With that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member.
Well, thank you. Let me just say my Republican friends are something else. But let me say something positive to begin with. I appreciate the fact that we have a panel on a bill that's coming from Energy and Commerce that actually includes two members who are on Energy and Commerce. I was getting worried for a while that Republicans were going to have Mr. Lawler, who testified on the previous Ways and Means bill, and even though he's not on the Ways and Means Committee, somehow testify on this bill, even though he's not on Energy and Commerce. So at least you're both on the Committee of Jurisdiction. So I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
I may, I'm just a simple, humble backbencher on the Energy and
Well,
Commerce
at least you're on
Committee.
the committee. And so I can understand why you're sitting here, because you are on the committee, number one. Number two, I mean, again, this is an emergency meeting we're having this morning. And I assume this is a really important piece of legislation from the Republican point of view. Tell me about the hearing in Energy and Commerce on this bill.
There was no hearing.
Is that correct? There was no hearing on this bill?
So there have been a number of hearings on this
Oh,
very
okay.
topic.
But not on this bill.
HR 1130, which is the substance of this bill,
right.
passed through the Rules Committee and the floor
And so
of
was
this
there a
House.
markup on this bill?
Yes, on 1130, but
No,
not
on this bill, on the bill we're talking about today.
No,
I
this was-
I understand
yeah.
this was drafted yesterday.
Yeah, that's, I am too. I mean, we have this new, standard that Republicans tell us, if you mention this topic, or if it's somehow related to something that was discussed in committee before, that all of a sudden that covers the hearing and the markup. You don't need a hearing and a markup anymore. It's an interesting way to look at legislating around here. But, but since it's an emergency, does this cut off funding for anything? Does this stop an executive order, or does this, I mean, I'm trying to think substantively, like, what does this do I disagree with Dr. Burgess's view, and with all due respect to my chairman, I'm just trying to, like, specifically, what does this do to, like, change policy right now?
It doesn't. It says, if you look at the resolved, the House just denounces it, condemns, and then it encourages the domestic production of reliable, affordable energy generation sources, which
So-
we've talked about.
So it doesn't do anything substantially, it's a press release.
That's
Is that what it is?
It's a love letter.
It's
as
a
I
love-
said.
a press
love
release.
note,
It's
It's a,
big
it's
oil,
a, it's a
yeah.
press, it's a press release. So we are having an emergency meeting on a press release.
To counter a press release from the administration last
But that, in your opinion, justifies this being brought up under emergency procedures to rush the House floor, by the way, which we're not going to debate today. I mean, I'm just like, what the hell is going on around here? I mean, I get it. We have disagreements on energy policy. And, some of us actually believe climate change is real. And we want to pursue, energy sources that will actually help diminish the continued rise of the climate crisis around the planet. We could have that debate, but to come here with a press release and to say this is an emergency that we have to do it today, no hearing, no markup. I mean, again, I'll go back to say, at least you're both on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is what we couldn't say that about the previous panel. I think this is not the way this place should be run. And this is a nothing burger, if there ever was one. And it is a press release, but it's a bad press release too. And so but this is what my Republican friends believe is urgent. And let me just finally say, I hope over the weekend that my Republican friends actually do some reflection on kind of like what's going on here. I mean, you're in charge. You have every right to pursue your priorities. But it's been 8 months. It's been 8 months since the Rules Committee actually reported a rule on a bill, brought to the floor a bill that actually became law. I don't know how you go home and justify that record. I get it, there are disagreements, but when Trump was president, I thought he was the worst president in my lifetime. A guy who had no respect for democracy, and a guy that didn't share our values, but yet when Democrats were growing, we were sending bills to him that he was actually signing. And so, we have Republicans are in control of the House, Democrats are in control of the Senate. You got a Democratic president right now. I mean, this is an opportunity for give and take, but it seems the only bills we can get to the White House have to come to the floor under suspension of the rules, where Democrats have to bail out Republicans. So I just think I regret that we're here doing this. It is a colossal waste of time, and to claim this is an emergency measure, boy, that's something I can't quite put my head around. But in any event, thank you both for being here, and again, at least you're both on the Committee of Jurisdiction. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'm going to advise both our witnesses and the committee that we are not going to recess, but we are going to, I want to urge you to go vote, and we'll just keep moving so we can try and get through this. And to our witnesses, we're going to try and work this where you can go down and vote. That one of you would stay and the other could go. We'll work with that witness, and if for any reason we moved past one that had to go vote and passed, and you needed to ask a question, we would, change the order so you could do that. So let's allow Ms. Castor to go vote. I'm going to turn over the gavel to my friend from Minnesota so I can go vote, and we just work through this and hopefully get through this as quickly as we can. So with that, I'm going to excuse myself, and the gentlelady is recognized, or welcome to take the chair. Yeah. Well, why don't you, next would actually be Ms.
Okay, as long as she doesn't have a question. Okay, thank you. I will recognize Mrs. Houchen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Burgess, thank you for bringing this. I just wanted you to, if you can, touch on the Biden administration's decision to halt new LNG export terminals. What does that mean for American energy production?
It means they're going to be deprived of their markets at a time when the world so seriously needs the product that they're putting up for sale.
It seems like...
And a further point, if I may, decreasing domestic production of fossil fuels doesn't mean that they're not going to be produced globally. Mm-hmm. They still will, but what they won't get the benefit of is the technology and the scientific expertise that has been developed in this country that allows natural gas to be produced with the smallest carbon footprint of any production facility anywhere in the world. But it's still going to be produced. So it'll be produced by Russia, Iran, in the worst possible way, and markets globally will be hungry for some product, and they will buy the product from Iran and Russia.
And that certainly is not good for our own national security.
Absolutely not. The whole concept of energy security, one that was introduced to me in 2008 during the debates between then Senator Obama and then Senator McCain, and the criticism that $800 billion a year was being spent on energy that was purchased from the Middle East, and we were basically funding a part of the world that was at war with us, and that we ought to have a better idea. Well, guess what? We had a better idea, and it occurred in the Trump administration, and we achieved energy independence, dare I say energy dominance, and it changed the geopolitical calculation throughout the world.
Thank you, Dr. Burgess. I yield back.
Thank you. And Ms. Scanlon, I was just wondering, do you have questions for Dr. Burgess or comment? Because I was just trying to figure out when Ms. Captor comes back if we could switch out for them to vote, or? Then I yield to recognize.
And I did appreciate Ms. Castor's Valentine's Day analogy, but as I expressed previously.
I did not, actually.
I'm shocked. But that this is a love letter to the industry.
But it was better than a Groundhog Day analogy.
Well, that's what I was going to make, because it does feel like this is Groundhog Day. Once again, it's a situation where we have a declaration of an emergency, which is pretty fact-free, and then we have some press releases and some sound bites, and then we're going to adjourn and go home for a long weekend. So people can campaign on the do-nothing bills and the do-nothing statements that they've made here today. So I was going to make a Groundhog Day analogy. I'm sorry. Thank you. I yield back.
Am I allowed to respond?
I recognize Dr. Burgess.
Well, this is a response to something that was produced by the administration last Friday. It came to us, no one knew this was coming last Friday. So yes, during the week, members of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, particularly on the Republican side, how do we counteract this now that the agency, now that the administration is going to directly work against American energy? What do we do to counter that? So this is the answer to that this is the response to what the administration produced last week.
And Madam Chair, I mean, obviously, the Groundhog Day response is that if there is to be a response that is going to have the imprimatur of Congress, that it needs to go through committee, and it cannot just be one party expressing its unilateral position. So, regular order, please.
The position has been expressed before from the committee several times this year, and we've voted on various bills on the floor of the House. The problem was when the administration took the unilateral action, absent of any information, absent of any testimony. What advisors did they talk to? Did they call you as Democrats and say, look, here's the people we've talked to, and we really think this action is absolutely necessary? Did you get the benefit of that information? Because I certainly did.
Well, and that's the purpose of a hearing, of course. So again, we would just say that this is not the way to conduct business and would prefer to move forward and actually get something done. Thank you.
And we will get something done today.
Mr. Lang, did you have questions for Dr. Burgess? Because I was going to have him just quick run down and vote, if that makes sense.
Hold your applause. I'll go vote and come right back.
And yield to somebody else.
All right, you know what?
Go ahead.
I will recommend it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that the whole nature of how we are proceeding in this moment, where we called an emergency hearing that overlaps with floor votes, that have overlapped with other things that people may or may not wanted to have done this morning. The president was here for a prayer breakfast. There were different things that were going on, whether or not we did, but we all came back together because we serve on rules. And we show up when there's an emergency. And, you know, we dealt with the one emergency in the earlier panel, which was not. And now we're dealing with a resolution emergency. And the love letter, I think, is an apt description. But I also do want to take this moment to think about where we actually are. No, I don't think it's an emergency when the United States is producing a record amount of natural gas. It's not really an emergency when the United States is producing a record amount of oil production. And it's not an emergency when we are actually bringing down the cost of energy. Madam Chair, I'd like to enter into the record the article, Surging U.S. Oil Production Brings Down Prices and Raises Climate Fears.
Without objection.
And that has the chart in here, which actually shows the United States producing historic levels of crude oil, and it goes, the chart actually goes through the roof. You know, it goes beyond the 12 million barrels a day, which have never, ever been reached before. The chart in here, which was actually, the source is the U.S. Energy Information Administration, shows natural gas production over time is also through the roof, so much more than was ever produced under President Trump. In the article, it actually shows that with the surge, I quote, with the surge in output, gasoline prices have fallen by close to $2 a gallon since the summer of '22. The increase in production has also provided the Biden administration with substantial leverage. It points out that the surge in gas prices was because Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's go back to Russia invaded Ukraine. Republicans are refusing to provide resources to Ukraine. But Russia, the one that you are, by refusing to provide resources to, are supporting, in essence, are the ones that have caused those high gas prices. And this resolution does nothing about that. It does nothing to address the crises that we are actually seeing. But it does, in the article, note about climate fears. And in my state, which we are an oil and gas producing state, and that is an important source of our income, and I see that we are going to have that income for a while to come. In fact, we are benefiting from this surge. we are also very concerned about the climate crisis. And we think that we can address both, that we do not have to say that we are not turning off the spigots tomorrow, but we must address it. We must address it by reducing the methane emissions, which New Mexico has led on. So there are things that we can actually take, and that the Biden administration, the Democratic Congress has taken. Maybe you can share with us ways in which the Inflation Reduction Act has actually reduced costs for the American consumers with regards to energy prices.
Well, I want to thank you and note the leadership of New Mexico and Governor Lujan Grisham in New Mexico, because you are taking advantage of a lot of the initiatives in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law to make sure that methane emissions we're able to cap certain wells. We're able to try to rein in a lot of the emissions, because a lot of folks talk about natural gas, but methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. It stays in the atmosphere. It's more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year lifespan. The Inflation Reduction Act helps us control those emissions. Now, in the Energy and Commerce Committee, we've had, that's the low-hanging fruit to try to control those emissions and that pollution, and unfortunately, Republicans have just ignored that. It's impossible if you want to use methane, as we need in a lot of industrial processes, and to fuel certain parts of our lives, you've got to control emissions. The Inflation Reduction Act really promotes cleaner, cheaper energy, new cost savings for our neighbors to save on energy-efficient appliances, to afford the electric vehicles as that transition goes on, to help with the tax credits. So when you are moving to clean energy, you put a little more cash into your pocket, helps with weatherization of homes. There are a lot of my neighbors back in Florida that really need additional insulation and those energy-efficient appliances at a time where, it's really interesting in Florida. You'd think we're the Sunshine State, but we're powered primarily, the utilities have kept us mainly on gas. And what that has done is our electric bills have skyrocketed. In my area, the Tampa Electric Company, since 2019, electric bills have gone up 62%. We're paying well over $150 per month. This is out of sight, and it's because gas is so volatile. So the intent of the Inflation Reduction Act over time is to help replace those volatile fuel sources with cheaper, clean energy. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a transition, but right now, the Inflation Reduction Act is putting money back into the pockets of our neighbors.
About $1,400 is the estimated reduction in prices for the average family across the country of what the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, that's real good stuff. And I think that that's something to do is like, they want to bring up this emergency. I mean, if we have to have a congressional action and a rules hearing every time the administration makes a decision, really? They were elected. They are carrying out the mandate that they were given when they were elected, and they're carrying out the laws that we passed to do some good work. Ranking member.
You had raised something earlier that I think is worth repeating, and that is that the spike in energy prices in the aftermath of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And the bottom line is, if you want to talk about an emergency, making sure Ukraine gets the aid it needs right now is an emergency. I mean, Putin is making advances. They're running out of bullets. I mean, would you agree that a true emergency would be to bring a Ukraine package to the?
Yes, that would be that would be something that I would expect the Rules Committee and the House of Representatives to be speeding to the floor.
And we know that if Putin succeeds, the impact on our energy costs would be real. But I mean, like, why aren't we able to vote on a Ukraine package? I mean, why won't, why can't we vote on a Ukraine package?
Well, just to level set things, I did vote for the Ukraine aid in June of 2022.
Are you fine with letting them run out of bullets and?
Here's what I'm not
Putin
fine
take
with.
yeah.
Since that aid was voted in June of 2022, the administration has not come and talked to us other than a couple of perfunctory undersecretary briefings that we've had, but we've only had 3 of those in almost 2 years. If the administration needs additional funding for Ukraine, please come and tell us what the plan is, come and tell us what the end point is, come and tell us how the money is being spent, what we are doing to prevent it from being diverted to bad actors. They won't do it. They won't answer my phone calls. They won't answer anything when I say, I need to know, when I go back to my constituents, what are we doing in Ukraine? They won't tell me.
Well, I'm happy to put in a good word for you because they answer my phone calls, and I know they answer a lot of Republican phone calls as well on Ukraine, and that they're deeply concerned that, and by the way, and President Zelensky has been up here meeting with members of Congress time and time again. So the excuse that we don't know what the situation is in Ukraine, we don't know that they're running out of bullets. I mean, I don't know where you've been, but the reality is this is a crisis. And I'm just trying to, and you can vote no on it, right? But I think some of us are at the point now where, what will it take to just schedule a damn vote?
Maybe we could have some information come to the Congress. The last person in the administration who communicated to me was Wendy Sherman, and then she left the next day.
Well,
So that was not helpful.
I'm happy to try to set up meetings for you, because I assure you that they're more than eager to talk to people about the crisis in Ukraine. But the idea that we're watching this country run out of bullets and giving Vladimir Putin access to overtaking the country, which would have a tremendous impact on energy costs here in the United States. But just from a moral point of view, the idea of letting, Russia invade a sovereign nation, I mean, that's an emergency. I mean, we can add that as an amendment when we bring up the rule to bring up, a Ukraine package, so we can actually have a vote. We could debate on it and vote on it, and you can vote no if you want. But, I mean, at this point, that's a real crisis, and Republicans have used every excuse. Now, this is a new excuse. Usually it's like, we can't do anything until we pass a bill on the border. Now, we learned last week that it doesn't matter whether you don't believe that laws are the answer, so we don't need to pass a bill. So I'm just trying to figure out what the holdup is. But,
And
yeah.
it really demonstrates the misguided priorities of the extreme MAGA Republicans in Congress to think that a love letter to protect the polluter profits over the interest of Americans is the priority here in the House of Representatives is truly.
And I'll just say this, and you're right, it is a love letter. But if I were the polluters, to be satisfied with just this is kind of a cheap date, because the bottom line is it does nothing. It does nothing. It's a press release. It is really, but I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
And the thing is, like, what the plan is, the president has sent us a plan. The president has requested a supplemental package. That is a plan. The president sent over to Congress, not only have we had Zelensky, not only have we had others, but we had a classified briefing, which include Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, General Charles Q. Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Isabel Coleman, because USAID, because things are bad. And that's precisely it. That is an emergency. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia caused the surge in gasoline prices. They hadn't hit $100 a gallon for a long time until we had that invasion. And I think that is something that what this does allow us to do is actually set some of the records straight. So having this emergency hearing, it allows us to say, no, record production, yes, yes, there are other concerns, and let's talk about some of these other things, including the fact that what President Biden is doing is bringing down energy costs. In New Mexico, $1.4 billion, 2,105 jobs, and this is replicated throughout the country. So this is the good stuff that is happening. So my response on this resolution, which is just a resolution of complaint, is look at all the good stuff that's happening and let's herald it. It's not an emergency, but maybe we need to celebrate it. Maybe we need to actually change what the love letter is like, thank you for doing what you have done, and let's set the record straight. Record profits and record investment in our future. That is a great thing, and that is why I'm going to sadly have to vote against this resolution. And with that, did you want to add anything?
No, I just had recalled attending.
But maybe I'll turn it over. I see we have the chair. Is there anything, the ranking member, is there anything else you wanted to add to this debate? Okay, and Castor has to catch a flight, so I will end there and yield back.
Gentlelady's excused. We know you have a flight. Thank you for taking the time to be here. And Mr. Chairman, always an honor to have you here, so our friends maintain representation, and anybody, see, we do not have actually any more questions, I'm advised, for you, so I don't want to hold you up either. And I said, Mr. Chairman, that's out of honor of the past, Mr. Ranking Member. So anyway, always good to have you.
Referred to me one time as an extreme MAGA Republican.
I refer to him constantly as very moderate and.
Stop it!
Oh, come on, you're not running again. The truth can come out now. With that, let me turn to our good friend from New York, Mr. Langworthy, for any questions he might have for Mr. Burgess.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Burgess, for bringing this forward today. I mean, this is what happened last Friday is a continuation of this administration and the Democrat Party's war on natural gas that we've seen all over the country. I mean, my district deals with this every single day. I represent the Marcellus Shale. We're unable to harness that God-given natural gas because of environmental extremists that want to prevent progress, a clean bridge fuel to the future. What I find very troubling with this is a report we saw out of FERC about Winter Storm Elliott last year. And the Northeast grid was so dangerously close to running out of power because of a lack of production of natural gas. We're seeing that continue. We're seeing, the stifling of pipeline creation. And with our harsh winters in the Northeast, my district alone had a windstorm that took out the power in the western end of my district, followed by 2 back-to-back snowstorms. And, we got anywhere between 6 and 8 feet of snow on top of that. But what keeps our people safe is safe, reliable natural gas. So the fact that the administration is taking this additional step to stifle the growth of this industry, and instead of unleashing American natural gas on the world and helping to prevent money from going to our enemies, I just think it's abhorrent, and I really salute you for bringing this forward, and would like to yield to you if there's anything you'd like to add in closing.
I associate myself with all of your remarks. I can't even conceptualize 8 feet of snow. But I do feel your pain. I mean, our grid in Texas was challenged a couple of years ago, and that is an extremely uncomfortable feeling. The only way you prevent things like that from happening is to have an abundant amount of immediately dispatchable energy at your beck and call, and that's what natural gas provides. You're not going to build coal plants. Apparently, the country is not. You need to supply that power with thermal sources, and that's natural gas.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, I thank the witness that remains and for your testimony, Dr. Burgess, and you're excused. Is there anyone else seeking?
My questions for the record.
Okay. And I'm sure they'll be brilliantly answered. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 7160 or House Resolution 787? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. Before I recess this, I want to thank all the members. I particularly want to thank the staff, and I especially want to thank the stenographer. This has been a difficult thing to try and conduct while we were having votes, and I appreciate everybody working together so the questions could be asked, the testimony could be given, and the record could be.
So we're recessing?
We're going to, without objection, the committee stands in recess subject to the call of the chair.
And we don't know how long, do we?
We do not yet.
Because this is an emergency, right? Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay, we recess.